Hi, my name is Nick. I'm very pleased to be meeting you in a new format. I am your professor for Philosophy 2500, aka Introduction to the Theory of Knowledge, aka Epistemology. Hopefully, we're going to have some fun and hopefully learn a lot of things. These videos are one of the tools that we'll be utilizing as we go through the class, especially for those of you who are maybe more auditory thinkers or people who like to follow videos. For those of you who like to follow text more than something like a video, of course there are the reading notes, but these are intended to be supplemental to the reading notes, which are, of course, are merely supplemental to the text readings, though I go beyond the text in some ways in the reading notes, and may also do that here in these videos. This week we're going to be discussing, as the title will have made clear, rationalism and empiricism. I'm going to say very little about the details of the readings from Descartes, Locke, and Berkeley and Hume, much less Plato. I'm going to be focusing on the moderns. What I do want to focus on are some themes that didn't come out of the readings. So right off the bat, we can see how these videos will be supplemental and useful to follow along. Now, one of the things that I do want to discuss, at least implied in the readings, is this idea of the idea of ideas, in a sense, what epistemologists have come to call the way of ideas. This is a modern view of how perception works, of how sense experience works. That starts with Descartes and gets adopted by Locke, and then through Locke gets adopted by Berkeley and Hume and becomes a sort of commonplace in epistemology. Not surprising if this is a common tenet that's held by the key rationalists and the key empiricists. We shouldn't be surprised to see it as more or less universal, since most people, especially from the time we're looking at, the 17th century to the really end or middle of the 18th century, middle of the 19th century, fell into one of these two camps, really a sort of rationalist or empiricist until we get to Kant at the end of the 18th century. In any regard, I don't want to muddle things up too much. I want to stay focused on rationalism and empiricism, that great dichotomy, which of course is not exhaustive of all epistemology, but seems to structure a number of epistemological debates and a number of debates we're going to be looking at in this course. And we'll get clearer on exactly what rationalism and empiricism are. Now, I said already that both are committed to this thesis, the way of ideas. This is the commitment which Descartes, Locke, Berkeley, and Hume all take to be a fairly innocent one, that the only things we have present before the mind are ideas, or at least the only direct things we have present before the mind are ideas. Now, implicit in this thesis is an idea of the mind. The mind is something that is essentially private and subjective, something that we turn our introspection or direct awareness upon to see its special contents. And there's also a claim about those contents, that they have a ideational being, that they are not external things, that they are not creatures of the mind which are in some sense material. They shouldn't be confused with things like brain states or neural structures, which certainly Descartes, who had a beginner's take in anatomy, actually had one of the best 17th century anatomical minds. He understood a great deal of the brain. He understood that the brain's function, in some sense, was accompanying, at the very least, our mental processes like thought and introspection and reflection and imagination and sensation. But nonetheless, these things as epistemological activities cannot be reduced to what's going on in the brain. Now, that being said, it's interesting to see that Locke adopts this Cartesian framework, even though he's very much opposed to most of the other tenets of Cartesian philosophy as an empiricist. So Locke says, I agree with Descartes. The only thing known to the mind are its own ideas. But I disagree with Descartes that there are any form of ideas that come from faculties other than sense faculties, other than sight, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. Um, these are, to use a term from Hume and apply it a bit anachronistically to Locke, the only inlets of knowledge. So the empiricism isn't based on an entirely new theory of mind. It's based on fundamentally the same theory of mind, but it is nonetheless more restrictive. The only ideas that are worth talking about, and here Locke equivocates a little bit. He thinks you can have a rational idea of God that doesn't come from the senses. But all of our other substantive knowledge comes from ideas. Now you might be thinking, well, I've never perceived the number two through the senses. I've seen two things, two sticks, two apples, but I've never seen the number two. I've never seen the property of uncleness, even though I've seen uncles before. I've never seen the true abstract form of car, even though I've seen a number of cars. So how exactly is all of our knowledge supposed to be reducible to sensation? This is a sort of very Platonic sentiment. Um, Locke has a very sophisticated theory to account for this problem, without positing an intellectual faculty that knows these things directly as Plato and Descartes did. Locke says we come to know these sorts of entities not based on some other faculty, but based on abstractions from and combinations of our simple sensory ideas. So here we have the distinction that doesn't actually come out in your reading, at least I don't think, between simple ideas and complex ideas. So simple ideas are ideas that we get from sense. They're the sort of atoms of sense perception. They're the most basic and fundamental ideas. But once we have them in our minds, the mind is free to do all sorts of associative things with them. It's free to abstract qualities from a number of different simple ideas. So Locke's idea, once again not in your text of how this works, is milk, chalk, snow. They all have this common property called white, so I can abstract in a sense from all of those different ideas a new idea, the complex idea of whiteness. Also, I can take simple ideas like a simple idea of horse and a simple idea of horn and put them together and get unicorn. So this accounts for the ways in which we can come to understand a number of tricky concepts, a number of tricky complex ideas based merely on the simple ideas of sense and some innocent and fairly straightforward operations of the mind, abstraction and combination. Certainly we don't need anything like a rational insight or intuition or intellect to be able to, or much less something like divine intervention in epistemic matters in order to come up with these ideas. But at the same time, I was saying earlier that we can't necessarily think of rationalism and empiricism as diametrically opposed. They adopt some of the same ideas. Well, we can't just think that because empiricists have the same basic idea that all knowledge comes through the senses. Just because they all share that idea doesn't mean that they agree on other matters. And in a sense, part of the history that we're seeing in the readings from this week are just how different forms of empiricism may be in regards to questions like what's happening beyond the ideas. Are ideas the only things that we can ever come to even contemplate? Are there material objects which cause ideas? And if so, how are they known? what sorts of things might exist if not material objects that cause our ideas. Can our ideas not have a cause? That seems to be an impossibility for all of the empiricists. But they disagree on a number of these fine-grained topics in spite of agreeing on the big topics. Now, one of the big topics is abstraction. Uh,